to know more about the Berlin Wall and its purpose, here is a brief history of the wall. The partitioning of Berlin. As World War II came to an end in 1945, the Allied Peace Conference at Yalta and Potsdam determined the fate of Germany's territories. They split the defeated nation into four Allied occupation zones. The eastern part of the country went to the Soviet Union, while the western part went to the United States, Great Britain, and eventually France. They did the same thing to Berlin. The Soviets took the eastern half, while the other Allied forces took the western. This four-way occupation of Berlin began in June 1945. Construction of the wall. After the war, with the help of the Soviet occupying forces, the SED, the ruling Communist Party, began establishing a dictatorship in East Germany, or GDR. Large parts of the East German population, however, did not agree with the new political and economic system. Consequently, a mass migration to the West began in the late 40s. By August 1961, East Germany had lost a sixth of its population. The SED had begun sealing off the East German border to West Germany as early as 1952, so it became increasingly dangerous to flee directly to the West. Many choose to take advantage of the last loophole, and that is by crossing the sector borders to West Berlin, which were still open. So on August 13, 1961, the SED began erecting barbed wire to seal off the border all around West Berlin. Walls were erected within a few days, hoping this would end the growing mass migration to the West once and for all. The SED also wanted to stabilize its power over the people in East Germany and to demonstrate its sovereignty to the world. But the barbed wire and walls were unable to completely stop escape attempts, so the border barriers in Berlin were continually expanded and reinforced. Before the wall was built, Berliners on both sides of the city could move around fairly freely. They crossed the east-west border to work, to shop, to go to the theater and the movies. Trains and subway lines carried passengers back and forth. After the wall was built, it became impossible to get from east to west Berlin except through one of the three checkpoints. At Helmstedt, Checkpoint Alpha, at Reilinden, Checkpoint Bravo, and in the center of Berlin at Friedrichstrasse, or Checkpoint Charlie. At each of the checkpoints, the East German soldiers screened diplomats and other officials before they were allowed to enter or leave. Except under special circumstances, travelers from East and West Berlin were rarely allowed across the border. Expanding the wall. But even after its construction, the wall did not completely stop the westward migration. On the contrary, because the wall separated friends and relatives in Berlin, the pressure on the East Berliners and people on the outskirts, motivation to flee became even greater. As people kept trying to cross border barriers, the SED kept expanding the border fortifications. What began as a single simple wall evolved into a complex, multi-layered border installation designed to prevent escapes. At first, after every successful escape, border soldiers and pioneer units added temporary individual barriers behind the border wall. After a border area had been established in 1963, large expanses of this area were also blocked off by a fence. In the mid-60s, buildings were torn down to make room for a uniform border strip that would provide soldiers with an unobstructed view and clear field of fire. Achterstrasse is one of their examples. Achterstrasse was established in 1752 when Berlin was expanding to the north and the street was named in 1801. After World War II, It continued to be a lively crossroad between the eastern city center and the working class district of Wedding. It crossed the border between East and West Berlin at the Sofian Parish Cemetery. When the wall was erected in 1961, it was one of the first places that was divided. The SED was able to strongly curb the mass migration to the west by building the wall, but people still tried to get to West Berlin. So the border fortifications were continuously expanded and reinforced. In consequence, the wall on Achterstrasse also evolved into a border strip containing many different barriers. Coincidentally, the systematic dismantling of the wall also began at the same site on June 13, 1990. Over the following years, more barriers were installed within this dead strip. In the 70s, a second inner wall were added, blocking off the border strip to East Berlin. Border fortifications in the 80s. Through the years, border fortifications were constantly being developed and improved. In the early 80s, the inner wall on the East German side was the first obstacle that fugitives encountered. Then they had to climb over a signal fence that, when touched, activated an alarm for the border soldiers and observation towers. A carpet of steel spikes often lay at the foot of the fence with the sharp ends pointing upward, either to injure or deter fugitives. Officially, they were referred to as surface obstacles, but the guards called them asparagus bed. In the West, they were sometimes called Stalin's lawn. After a fugitive had crossed the patrol road and security strip, he had to get past the tank traps that were designed to prevent an escape with a car or truck. In the inner city area, they were usually made of railroad tracks welded together and enveloped in a barbed wire, thus also posing an obstacle to people escaping on foot. On the outer ring border, a ditch was also added. The nearly 12-foot high border wall was the last obstacle before reaching the west. At some areas, dog runs were also installed so that watchdogs could block the path, alert border soldiers, and deter fugitives from continuing their flight. At night, the border strip was lit up brightly by a line of lamps allowing soldiers to see fugitives in the dark. Both walls enclosing the border strip were painted white on the inner side so that a fleeing person could be easily recognized. Watchtowers stood approximately 250 meters apart. They were positioned so that the guards posted there could easily oversee the border area between two towers. They monitored the border strip and rear border territory and ready to prevent any escape. The guards were also expected to maintain surveillance on the area of West Berlin that bordered the wall. In the late 70s, the SED leadership had the wall rebuilt, hoping to achieve international recognition. The SED no longer wanted the East German capital's image tarnished by the border fortifications with its metal gratings, bunkers, and vehicle obstacles. These types of barriers were removed in 1983. This was possible because the new wall had a much stronger blocking capacity and surveillance of all of East Germany. So the border fortifications became less crucial to preventing escapes. By the late 80s, shortly before the wall fell, most of the menacing obstacles between East and West Berlin had been removed from the wall. Order to shoot. But the wall and border fortifications were not enough to hinder fugitives from escaping. From 1961 until the wall came down in 1989, more than 5,000 East Germans, including some 600 border guards, managed to cross the border by jumping out of the windows adjacent to the wall, climbing over the barbed wires, flying in hot air balloons, crawling through sewers, and driving through unfortified parts of the wall at high speed. In return, the walls had to be guarded by armed soldiers who had the order to shoot at fugitives. if they were unable to hinder their escape. An official law, the GDR border law, was not passed until 1982. But the changing standard situation beginning in 52, a verbally dictate command status existed that obligated the border policemen and border soldiers to shoot at fugitives if they were unable to prevent their escape in another way. The use of weapons caused many people to lose their lives at the border. In Berlin alone, 90 people, most of them trying to flee, were shot and killed by East German border soldiers between 1961 and 1989. The order to shoot was not revoked until April 1989, and in November of the same year, the border opened, and the order lost its significance. Fatalities at the Berlin Wall. At least 140 people were killed or died at the wall in connection with the East German border regime between 1961 and 1989. 101 East German fugitives who were killed, died by accident, or committed suicide while trying to flee through the fortifications. 30 people from the east and west without any escape plans, and one Soviet soldier were shot or killed in an accident. 8 East German border soldiers were either killed by deserters, comrades, a fugitive, an escape helper, or a West Berlin policeman by accident, or intentionally while on duty. At least 251 travelers also died during or after they had gone through checkpoints at the Berlin border crossings. Unknown numbers of people suffered and died from the distress and despair in their personal lives as a consequence of the Berlin Wall being built. In all, at least 171 people were killed trying to get over, under, or around the Berlin Wall. The fall of the wall. At the conference in Helsinki in 1975, the East German leadership agreed in principle, without wanting to admit it, the right of people to move freely and the freedom to travel. Afterwards, more and more East German citizens submitted applications to immigrate permanently to West Germany. An opposition movement had also developed in East Germany in the 1980s that expressed increasingly fundamental criticism of the political and social conditions. Environmental damage and economic stagnation also angered the general public, leading it to turn away from the East German state. Similar developments occurred in other Eastern Bloc states. After Mikhail Gorbachev became General Secretary of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union in 1985, the political situation in the Eastern Bloc slowly began to change. Gorbachev first tried to solve the serious economic and social problems using internal political reforms. In 1988, he gave up the Brezhnev Doctrine, political principle central to Soviet foreign policy that demanded limited sovereignty of the Warsaw Pact nations. This change allowed the Eastern Bloc states to determine their own national policies. The demolition of the wall and the remains today. Soon after the border opened, the demolition of the wall began. The so-called wall packers broke off pieces as souvenirs. An increasing number of new border crossings were created, leaving behind large gaps in the wall. Border soldiers began dismantling the signal fence and other elements of the border of the same year. Places of the wall were sold all over the world. In June 1990, the systematic dismantling of the border grounds began at Ackerstrasse between the districts of Wedding and Mitte and was for the most part complete by the end of the year. Soon, the wall was gone and Berlin was united for the first time since 1945. The reunification of East and West Germany was made official on October 3, 1990. almost 1 year after the fall of the wall. Then the first section of the Berlin Wall were designated a historical monument on the same year. So that's it for the history of the Berlin Wall. Until next time, don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe. Bye! So guys, if you like our videos, please subscribe to our channel and feel free to comment.
Hit the bell, hit the bell, hit the bell, hit the bell. Come on guys, hit the bell.
For notifications.
And don't forget to share.
And like!